Hello, I'm Brian John, and I've come along here today to do a little bit of reminiscing. Welcome to my picnic bench. Just as a break from the tasks of the day, I want to remember a few things from ancient history. Some of my earliest memories date from the 1940s, but many of the happiest memories that I have relate to my time as a student in Oxford University. And in 1962, when I was in my third year reading geography, a friend of mine, David Sugden, and myself decided it would be rather a funny thing to do to go to East Greenland on an expedition. So we planned and organised the expedition and got a team together to set off for the Fjord country of East Greenland during the months of July, August and early September. We managed to get permission from the university and the support of the Exploration Society, and we managed to rustle up the funds that we needed and put together a team of 8 people. 4 of them were from the university. David and myself called ourselves geomorphologists. And then we had a zoologist whose name was Geoffrey Arnold, a botanist, David Chamberlain, and that was the core of the team from the university. And then we had 2 people from Queen's University Belfast, Jimmy Cruikshank, who was a lecturer there, and a student of his called Eric Cahoon. They were both geomorphologists. And then to make up the party, we had Sandy Hall, who had polar experience in the Antarctic and was a very good man to have around. He was also going to study ornithology. And then finally, we had Sven Wurm, who was a Dane, a school teacher, who had a lot of experience already in East Greenland. And so he was our cameraman, and he was also our liaison man who knew a lot of people in East Greenland already and was able to help out with the organisation of things on the ground. So that was the team, and we spent 8 weeks altogether in the field, as I said. The first part of our expedition has already been described in an earlier video that I made called The Long Walk, relating to our walk over the mountains and across glaciers and wading meltwater streams and wandering through or staggering through mosquito-infested tundra on the way to our field working area. That was quite an exciting walk. But this little video relates to our time in our field working area of Kjove land, right in the heart of the Fjord country. First of all, the context. Scoresby Sund is truly spectacular, part of a vast network of East Greenland fjords formed over millions of years. These steep-sided, flooded troughs are choked with ice flows, unstable icebergs, and sheets of brash ice for most of the year, but they are open for navigation during the short summer. Even if you're in a location where you cannot see the ice kaleidoscope, you can hear the ice symphony. Thunderclaps, low rumbles, sharp cracks, creaks and splashes, some close by, some in the far, far distance. The harmonies are amazing. In the spring or early summer, there can be a polynya in Hall Bredning, a patch of open water in a great expanse of pack ice, where seals, walruses, narwhals and waterfowl congregate. Once upon a time, it was an important hunting area for the Greenlanders from Scoresby Sund and for the small group of families who lived at Sud Cap. Anyway, on the western flank of Kjove land, we have a triangular upland area or plateau called Pythagorasbjerg, cut off from the mountains of the Stounings Alps by a deep glacial valley containing 2 beautiful lakes called Holger Danske's Briller. That means Holger Danske's spectacles, for obvious reasons when you look at the map. Holger Danske was a mythical hero in Danish folklore, and a Danish resistance group was named after him in World War II. On the western flank of this upland plateau is the Pythagoras Klippe, at 4,500 feet, one of the world's great cliffs. It was cut by the Nordvest glacier and dominates the outer end of the fjord. The enormous cliff is so high that if you were to plonk Ben Nevis, Britain's highest mountain, out in the fjord, you could stand on the cliff top and look down at the summit. It's more than 3 times as high as the Empire State Building, and twice as high as the famous Pulpit Rock in Norway. It's also far taller than the famous El Capitan rock wall in America. The geology is similar to that of the Stownings Alps, with granite and other crystalline rocks. But there are no clean climbing walls here. The cliff face is broken up by great chasms and fractures, and rockfalls are frequent. This giant, forbidding, lethal cliff stretches for about 4 miles, running almost north-south. And as we shall see, it plays a central role in our narrative. To the north of Kjove land is Gurreholmsdal, carrying a substantial glacial meltwater stream, and the Karstriggen, an upland plateau made of limestone, very spectacular, with cliffs, canyons and bare white rock littered with huge glacial erratics. Beyond that are the Stownings Alps, containing some of Greenland's most dramatic alpine scenery, with jagged black peaks and a labyrinth of snowfields and glaciers. Greenland's highest peaks are found in this mountain range. There are scores of summits and pinnacles over 8,000 feet above sea level. And to the east we find the Fjord, Greenland's largest river, carrying the meltwater from at least a dozen glaciers. It's about 60 miles long and up to 3 miles wide, a labyrinth of interconnected, braided channels, so heavily loaded with debris, sand, gravel and boulders, that they're constantly getting blocked and moving sideways. If you were to make a map of the channels today, it would be different than the map you would make tomorrow. Anyway, at the height of the summer, the Fjord River is uncrossable. Its thunderous roar can be heard many miles away, so it dominates the soundscape just as it dominates the landscape. It's like the drone or background sound on a set of bagpipe, with the sounds of melting ice and breaking icebergs providing the harmonies and the melodies. Further away in the east is Jamesonland, a low rolling landscape of dry tundra and wide horizons, where the traces of past glacial action are so subtle that for many years people thought it had not been much affected by the Ice Age. And further away to the west, there are more intersecting and spectacular fjords, the pristine plateau ice caps of Milneland and Rhineland, and the Greenland ice sheet itself, stretching all the way westwards to Umanak, 500 miles away. Finally, and close at hand, there is the Kjove land tundra, a wide expanse of undulating terrain with gravelly banks and hillocks, shallow stream beds, bogs and small lakes. No trees, but in places there is a tangle of dwarf birch and dwarf willow, with spreads of bilberry, heather, cotton grass, mosses and lichens. Virtually all of the birds on the tundra are ground nesting, mostly around the inland lakes. We counted at least 40 different bird species, including king eiders, pink-foot geese, great northern divers, and the iconic long-tailed skua, Lille Kjove in Danish. So Kjove land is named after the skua. So all in all, Kjove land is really rather special, lying at the intersection point of all these different landscape types. It has its own special climate and its own ecology, relatively dry and sunny, and dominated by the weather coming from the ice sheet, and not by the weather coming westwards from the North Atlantic. Sometimes it's too hot for comfort. In a splendid and famous book published in 1957, this area was called the Arctic Riviera. Before we arrived in the field, we'd already decided that we wanted to do some glaciology work. We were not specialist glaciologists, but we were interested in the way that glaciers work. So David and I decided that part of our time in the field should be spent working on a glacier. The question was, which glacier should we go to? Because Nordvestfjord, which is where we were concentrating our studies, has such a huge glacier at the head of the fjord that it was virtually impossible even to contemplate working on that glacier. It was the Daugard Jensen's glacier, which is one of the huge glaciers that drain the ice from the Greenland ice sheet out towards the Atlantic coast of Greenland. So the alternative then was to look at one or other of the small glaciers feeding down ice towards the fjord from some of the side valleys. These little glaciers are fed for the most part by snowfields up in the mountains or else from plateau ice caps, and there were quite a few of them to choose from. We actually had an idea in our heads that one of the glaciers on the western side of Nordvestfjord would be well worth studying. And so at the outset of this story, we're still undecided as to where to go and what exactly to do. So this little episode relates to our expedition up the fjord to the area where we decided that we would do some glaciology work, even if it was going to be rather amateurish. We were quite determined to do it, and we were up for an exciting adventure. And so I'll be reading from now on from the diaries that I kept. These are the diaries, 3 of them. I kept a fairly detailed record each day of where we were going, what we were doing. It's occurred to me before doing the previous video that some of these extracts might be of interest to other people. So I've selected a few little snippets from the diary, these 3 diaries, and put them together with as many illustrations as I could find to illustrate the work that we were doing. Monday, the 13th of August, 1962. We've been here for almost a month now, and we turn our attention to our programme of work on a proper glacier. We need to check out the one that we've chosen on the basis of old maps and air photos. We leave base camp and head westwards onto the Pythagoras-Bjerg plateau. It's a hard slog, but when we're up in the hills at about 2,000 feet, we find ourselves looking down into a beautiful green valley near Sydkap, flanked by vertical cliffs and running down into a sheltered coastal inlet. It's a surprise, since the valley is not properly shown on our small-scale maps. Then the vista opens up. We see a great sweep of Hall Bredning and its gleaming population of bergy bits, brash ice floes, and gigantic tabular bergs, some drifting inexorably seawards and others grounded in the shallows. And we can see our glacier on the other side of the fjord. It's about 10 miles away, and we strain our eyes to examine each part in detail through the binoculars. It looks very dangerous. The floating snout is vertical and carving, and the whole glacier surface is heavily crevassed. Decision time. After some discussion on our way back to base, we weigh up the pros and the cons and decide that we must find a safer glacier, perhaps on this eastern side of the fjord. Tuesday, 14th of August, 1962. The others are away from base working on their own projects, and Dave and I enjoy a bit of a holiday. We try to catch some fish in the lake with the expedition fishing net, but we haven't really got a clue what we're doing. We get the net into a frightful tangle and give up in disgust. So we have a tin of tuna for lunch. Then we try out one of the kayaks on the lake in preparation for more challenging journeys still to come. The weather is glorious. The water surface is like the proverbial mill pond. So we head for the middle of the lake just to practice paddling techniques and to check that our vessel is watertight. Suddenly a strong wind hits us, and we are amazed at the speed with which big waves with white crests are whipped up. It gets distinctly uncomfortable, and while we discover that the kayak is in fact very stable and watertight, we realise that we need to be extremely alert in the future, especially when we're paddling out in the open fjord a long way from the shore. Wednesday, 15th of August, 1962. Now we have decided that we will visit a small unnamed glacier which almost reaches the sea at the western end of Hålogalandskas Briller glacial valley. The glacier party will consist of Dave, Sandy, Sven and me. We could walk all the way from base, but that would involve a trek of about 14 miles. Because of the ice drilling equipment, skis, sledge and scientific instruments, not to mention ice axes and ropes, we need at least 8 60-pound packs in order to set up camp near the foot of the glacier. In other words, we would probably have to make the same trek 3 times. Too much like hard work. The kayaks can carry 2 men each, plus very heavy loads, so it makes more sense to make a single trip from the coast of Nordvestfjord to Sydkapp, and from there along the shore of Nordvestfjord for about 12 miles to a landing beach near Storm Point. There will be risks involved, but we're all up for a bit of an adventure. Thursday, 16th of August. Before we can start on our voyage, we have to carry the folding kayaks and all of our glacier supplies, including food, paraffin, ice drilling equipment, tents, cooking gear, sleeping bags, skis and ropes, to a depot on the shore of Nordvestfjord. The distance from base is about 3 miles. We slog back and forth several times until everything is in the right place. Now we must assemble the canvas kayaks and check once again that they are seaworthy. We've tested the new one already and it's fit for purpose, but the old one, borrowed from one of Dave's friends, is the cause of some concern. The folding wooden frame was damaged during the parachute drop and has already been repaired, but now when we start to put it together again, we find that there are other problems. The frame needs reinforcement with the aid of nails, screws, spare bits of wood and pieces of string. Then we discover that the canvas bottom is badly abraded from previous use, with abundant small holes needing to be patched with the contents of our repair kit. Rubber solution, sticky tape and all-purpose glue are called into use, and it's 10 p.m. by the time we are reasonably satisfied that the job is done. We plod back to base, very hungry, for a late supper. On the way, we find an old pair of abandoned skis on the bank of a river, and Sandy is delighted. He decides that he will make a collapsible sledge that can be used for hauling our equipment once we reach the glacier. His inventiveness knows no bounds. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, we will be out on the fjord, heading north. Friday, 17th of August, 1962. The morning is bright and calm, and we decide that we will spend the day moving the 2 heavily laden kayaks along the coast to Sydkapp, a distance of about 10 miles. Jeff and Eric are keen to do some paddling, so they take the new kayak while Dave and I take the old one. It's a good opportunity to check its seaworthiness before we get into the dangerous waters of the fjord. The going is easy until we get into Sydkapp Bay. We negotiate a passage past 2 gigantic stranded icebergs. Then the wind gets up and the sea gets distinctly choppy. The wind direction changes when we're halfway across the bay and we realise that we're too far offshore for comfort. It's quite a struggle to get back to the relative safety of the water's edge. We move along the rocky coast in short bursts, paddling rapidly through patches of rough water and taking rests in the lee of little headlands. We pass an old Inuit settlement and find 2 good huts close to the shore where we will, we hope, be based at the beginning of September, when we wait to be picked up by a small boat hired from Scoresby Sund. We go ashore and stretch our legs for a while, and then we head off again, into the waves that are coming in from the west. We ship a little water, but the canvas repairs hold, and we are pleased with the way that the old kayak, fully laden, deals with the conditions. We round the headland of Sydkapp and at last enter the inlet, which is our destination for the day. We give it the unofficial name of Kajak. Calm water at last. We glide along the shoreline for almost 2 miles until we find a suitable landing spot, a small shingle beach with no apparent obstacles. Dave and I go in first, coping with an awkward following swell. We get our feet wet, but land safely, and then take as much weight out of the kayak as possible before we can lift it safely out of the water. Dragging a canvas kayak up across a rough beach is not an option. We're still unpacking when Jeff and Eric follow us in, and I'm looking the other way when Dave shouts, "They're over!" I look around and see the kayak bottom up, with our colleagues splashing about in waist-deep water, very wet indeed. they've committed the unforgivable crime of both trying to get out of a double kayak at the same time, going broadside and allowing a wave to tip them over. We spring into action, and in no time we have the kayak the right way up, ashore on a grassy bank, and with all of our baggage extracted. No damage done to our scientific instruments, thank goodness, and as for Eric and Jeff, the only thing damaged is their pride. But they're soaking wet and very cold, and there's an icy wind, so we move the kayaks well away from the waves, turn them bottom up, and cover all the contents with a bivouac sheet. Everything is now ready for the glacier party to continue the journey tomorrow. Then we set off at a brisk pace on the 6-mile trek up and over the Pythagoras-Bjerg Plateau. By the time we arrive back at base, the 2 soggy explorers are quite dry again, and the 4 of us are ravenously hungry. Saturday, 18th of August 1962. At breakfast time, there's a stiff wind blowing and the fjord looks uncomfortably choppy, so we hold off our departure until the evening calm sets in, and then we walk over the plateau to Kajak. Sandy carries with wonderful homemade sledge that we will use on the glacier. We get to the bay at about 7 p.m, but there's still a bitterly cold wind and the waves in the fjord are too dangerous for us to take on with our rather flimsy kayaks. So we decide to pitch camp and sleep for a few hours. At midnight there is a full moon hanging in a cloudless sky of pastel colours, but the wind has not abated. Sunday, 19th of August 1962. In the morning it's still too breezy for comfort, but we decide we cannot hang around any longer. In spite of the big waves washing onto our launching beach, we get off with Sven and I in the Klepper and Dave and Sandy in the old Granta. With Sven's first stroke he breaks the paddle, and at the same time I find that my end of the kayak is so packed with gear that I cannot slide properly into my seat. Somehow or other we manage to limp across to the other side of the bay where the water is calmer. We go ashore and I manage to repair the broken paddle by lashing the 2 bits of it together with a ski stick and a lot of string. I reorganise the baggage so that I fit nicely into my allocated space, and off we go again. We get out of the bay and into the open fjord, but we are confronted by white-crested waves hitting us broadside. We hug the rocky shore and manage to creep northwards on the inside of 2 large grounded icebergs, but sheets of grinding, sharp-edged brash ice fragments make us very nervous. Canvas kayaks are not made for this sort of challenge. Sven and I steer well clear of the ice fragments, but we ship 2 quite large waves, and Dave and I decide that we must make a strategic retreat. We spot a grounded iceberg with a little embayment on its lee side, and we manage to get ashore without further mishap. We unload the kayaks and haul them up out of the reach of the waves. We dry ourselves out in the bright sunshine and have something to eat. We call this delightful and utterly isolated spot Sunday Bay. We're stuck here for several hours while the gale force winds gradually abate. We watch a procession of giant icebergs sailing sedately out from the confines of the fjord into the broader waters of Holbredning. Then at about 7 p.m, the wind disappears completely and the waves dissipate. We hope that this is the nocturnal calm which we've observed on several other occasions when the pressure is high. And we see that there's a window of opportunity. Time to go. We are back on the water within a few minutes. We have to negotiate a stream of brash ice fragments across the bay, but once we're through that, the water is clear. We round the massive headland which we have labelled as Hell's Bells, and see ahead of us a great black cliff rampart which stretches almost all of the way to our destination, a distance of about 7 miles. It's terrifying. The cliffs are incredibly steep and in places overhanging. We see and hear stones dropping into the water and have to move further from the coastline in order to avoid that particular hazard. There's nowhere to land apart from a few small ledges, and even if we were to be stranded on one of those, there would be no escape. For the most part, the cliffs plunge straight down into the depths of the fjord. Somewhere up above us, out of sight, is the highest cliff of all, culminating in the summit of Pythagorasbjerg, 4,500 feet above sea level. Planet Earth is full of wonderful and magical places, but this one truly takes our breath away. At first we are intimidated and scared by the vastness of the fjord and the overwhelming power of the cliffs. We feel as insignificant as specks of dust lost in outer space. The black water beneath us is over 4,000 feet deep. We know that if we fall over, or if there's a catastrophic failure in one of the canvas kayak hulls, the fjord water is so cold that we will have maybe 4 minutes to live. We have inflated life jackets on, but they won't save us. But this is no time for dark thoughts. I suspect that we have all decided in the spirit of youth that we are indestructible and immortal. In an adrenaline rush, we decide that we must make a sprint for our destination. But then we realise that this would be exhausting and stupid, and we settle instead into a spirit of calm resolve with a steady and sustainable pace. We pass very close to a couple of enormous tabular bergs, each one the size of multiple football pitches, one freshly carved from the Daugard Jensen glacier and the other very old, with streams of meltwater pouring off it in cascades and echoing waterfalls. Very strange, a glacial river far offshore. The old iceberg has been carved into pinnacles and overhangs by several years of movement back and forth in the fjord. We hold our breath, but nothing happens, and ahead of us we see clear water and a glassy calm. As dusk sets in and the light level drops, the sea takes on the appearance of a sheet of smoked glass. We are in shadow, but the highest parts of the cliffs glow red in the late evening sunlight. We settle into a paddling routine, 2 kayaks moving in parallel about 20 metres apart, as close to the shore as we dare. I notice a sort of harmony between my breathing pattern, heart rate, arm movements, and paddle strokes. 1 stroke per second. 1, 2, 3, 4, and again and again. Perfection. Maybe this is what marathon runners feel when they are in the middle of a race. Everything as it should be. There's no such thing as fatigue. We stop talking. Conversation would be superfluous anyway, even sacrilegious. We all enter a sort of meditative state. I check on my colleagues Dave, Sandy and Sven, each of them lost in thought. Good men. Band of brothers. I have a lump in my throat. Now and then a long swell from some distant rolling iceberg lifts the kayaks quietly and gently drops them again. There's no bird song. Our paddle strokes are so clean that they make virtually no noise. The only sounds are those of the ice symphony, coming from brash icebergy bits and icebergs melting, rolling, collapsing and jostling for position in the silent and inexorable current that carries them towards the outer coast. We keep paddling for about 3 hours without a break. Fatigue is setting in at last, but suddenly the black cliffs give way to more gently sloping fjord sides, and we find ourselves in a little inlet. Our destination! Everything opens up before us, and we see 2 deep valleys converging just half a mile inland. One is the deep trough which runs through to Kjove land, and which contains the twin lakes of Holgerdanske's Briller. It's illuminated by the setting sun. The other one is smaller and narrower, a valley running north in deep shadow, overlooked by high snowfields and sharp pinnacles of black bedrock. There's a sandy beach, and we run the kayaks ashore. We climb out and spend a few minutes leaping about and doing contortions, trying to get some circulation back into our legs after 3 hours of paddling. There's a grassy bank close to the stream that carries the overflow from the nearest lake, a perfect campsite. We unpack the kayaks and haul them clear of the beach. We put up the tents and decide that although we had one supper 4 hours ago, we'd better have another one. Sven settles down, lights his pipe and sits quietly on the shore. A few metres away, a seal pops its head out of the water and watches us intently for a few minutes, probably resenting our intrusion into his little patch of the biggest fjord in the world. We look up the dark valley. We can't see it because of a high bank of moraine, but up there, somewhere, is our glacier. Looking back at it, having been making these extracts from the diaries, it strikes me just how hazardous the whole operation was. There were 4 of us in rather flimsy canvas kayaks with wooden frames, and only one of us had any previous experience in a kayak. The other 3 had never been in a kayak before. We didn't have survival suits of any sort or dry suits. The kayaks themselves were a bit dodgy in that one of them had holes in the bottom that had to be repaired, and the other one was paddled with a paddle that was mended with the aid of a ski stick and lots of string. And we were kayaking beneath cliffs that were 4,500 feet high, and the water beneath us was 4,000 feet deep. So it was a pretty intimidating terrain. But we didn't seem too worried about all those sorts of things, and so we took these extraordinary risks in the confidence that we would set out on our expedition, on our voyage up the fjord, and that we would arrive safely at the other end, close to the point where we would be working on our glacier.